Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining today's webinar, Monitoring AWS Services with New Relic Infrastructure. Speaking today, we have Adam Larson, engineer at New Relic. And then I just want to go over a few housekeeping items with you guys. Today's webinar will be recorded, and a recording will be sent out to you shortly after the presentation. There's going to be a live Q&A at the end, so please be sure to place any questions you might have in the questions panel of your GoToWebinar control panel. Last, there's a survey at the end, so please take the time to give us your feedback. We'd love to hear from you. And now I'll hand it off to Adam.
Thank you, Shay. So, hello everyone. As Shay mentioned, my name's Adam. I'm a developer here at New Relic. I've been here for about 3 years, and I've been involved in a couple different projects, the most recent of which is the infrastructure product that we'll be talking about today. As always, I like to start these things off just by thanking you for your time. Because I know as a member of the tech community, especially knowing that this is pretty early in your day right now, there's probably a lot of things competing for your time. We really respect the fact that you're spending the time with us, and we're going to be trying to make sure that you get something pretty useful out of the next 40 minutes you're spending here. So just kind of high-level overview about what we're going to be covering today. I'm going to be taking you through the New Relic Infrastructure product at kind of a high level. I know some of you are probably already familiar with the product, but I want to make sure that we all have kind of even footing and you get a high-level 10,000-foot view of what the product is. And then specifically we're going to pivot that into what does that mean for monitoring AWS services. A lot of our customer base, and probably you as well, are using AWS in a pretty heavy way. So what does it mean for the changes in monitoring, and how can New Relic and New Relic Infrastructure particularly help you with those challenges? And then, as Shay mentioned, at the end we're going to do a live Q&A. Please feel free to add any questions to the chat window here. I'd be more than happy to answer them. If we don't get time at the end, we'll definitely follow up afterwards. And the survey feedback also is something that we really appreciate you taking the time. So I do have a bit of an ulterior motive here. As you're looking right now, you can see kind of at the bottom there's this start your free trial. If you actually go to newrelic.com/infrastructure, feel free to even do it while I'm talking. I won't be offended. You'll actually be able to kind of sign up for an account without a credit card. You can do it out of the box and try out all this functionality in just a matter of minutes. So anything I say to you, please feel free to validate it. I mean, like, our products are dead simple to use, very simple to set up, and there's a lot of value there that I think speaks for itself. So I will show you the high-level stuff, but I really encourage you to try this out in your own environment and see the value yourself. So one final thing, the slides that I'm about to be preparing were actually prepared by my colleague Andrew Marshall in marketing, but unfortunately he wasn't able to attend today, so I will be the engineer presenting the marketing slides, so I'm going to do my best. Fingers crossed that this works out. But there are some kind of really obvious things that I want to tee up before we get into the product demonstration. Everything is dynamic. I'm gonna tell you a lot of things, especially if you're on the technical side, that like you probably already know because you're feeling them day in and day out. And they've been around for a while. 10 years ago when you were writing software, it used to be that you would spend a lot of heavy investment into these vertically scaled, what we call monolithic applications. Deeply complex, a lot of moving parts. Generally multi-process, always multi-thread. And we've been slowly migrating away from that. Application architectures themselves have actually shifted more towards the microservices. And what that means is, like, the logical entity of an application. There's still a web UI, there's a shopping cart, there's products that you're buying, but that hasn't changed at all. But all of the pieces behind that, like, how do you actually, like, put an item into a shopping cart? Like, how do you actually check out? What services are on the back end that are supporting that workflow? Have changed pretty drastically, and the monitoring needs there have changed as well, because it's no longer any deep visibility of this giant monolith. It's now, I need horizontal visibility across multiple applications, potentially with very shallow stacks. So that's just kind of some of the thought that we put into the new infrastructure product. Additionally, along with that monolith to microservices architecture, there's a shift in how do we actually provide the compute for these things? It used to be if you have one big, giant, monolithic application, you'd run it on a giant physical server. So you'd have, some big, beefy rack that you'd be investing in somewhere. A lot of money went into that. Very hard to upgrade if something went wrong. It was pretty disastrous because you had a lot of eggs in, very few baskets. but we've been democratizing that. Things have become more dynamic in that we actually, a lot of architectures in the microservices world especially are utilizing containers for their underlying compute. So as opposed to I have a specially named server that I need to know everything about, it's now I have kind of a generic compute entity that I just throw applications at, and if one of them needs to go down, I just rotate the applications onto a different generic server, and I don't really care about the individual servers quite as much as I did in the past, and I'm much more focused on the aggregate of all of those servers. So if you're familiar with some of the older New Relic products, New Relic servers in particular, this was something that traditionally was a bit of a pain point because we were very focused on that physical server. But when you started going with the dynamic ephemeral instances, it became a little bit harder to track, which is very prevalent in the AWS world. Just kind of continuing this, this really segues directly from the last slide, but the data center kind of mentality of everything's in this big on-premises data center that I'm paying a lot of money for is now segued into like, hey, I can actually utilize the cloud for a lot of my compute, and offload a lot of my IT cost, and do things a little bit quicker. I'm going to jump through, and I'm just going to kind of stop here really quickly and just say, everything is changing. That's clear. The way that we write software is changing. The demands of the business are changing. But most imperative, the actual process by which we need to monitor these systems and the metrics that we need to care about are changing. So with that, today's dynamic infrastructure requires a modern approach to how we actually approach monitoring. And that's exactly what New Relic Infrastructure was built off of. And just so you know, this is something that we actually GA'd at our company conference a little while ago, back in November, and this is now generally available. You can play with it. We'll get a little bit more into how you get started and what the different tiering, different tiers are for the product. But with that, I want to actually jump directly into the product demo because this is where I get most excited. Because the tee-up, like I said, I'm assuming a lot of you know why the world's changing and how the world's changing. But that's the problem. I want to focus on the solution here. So what you're looking at right now is actually more or less the home page of the New Relic Infrastructure product. Again, if you're familiar with our servers product, it may look somewhat similar. It's probably a lot of what you expect. I'm seeing CPU. That makes sense when I'm looking at servers. Memory, that's a metric that I understand. But one thing that may not be immediately clear to you is that what I'm actually looking at is not CPU for one server in particular, or memory for one server in particular, but I'm actually looking at all 516 servers that I have running at my company. This is a demo app, but basically if you had thousands of different servers, you would be seeing the aggregate CPU performance across all of them by looking at this page. So that really helps again with that. It's no longer about the vertically scaled entity, where it's I care about that one individual server for everything. Now I can actually look cross-compute and say, I know these 3 servers are all supposed to be supporting this application or this tool in this way. So now I can isolate individual segments of these servers and start to say, I want to see how my servers in a specific region or for a specific application are doing. So just a couple of examples of how easy that is with this product. We can actually, first off, if you want to go to the individual host, that isn't something that we forbid you from doing. But let's say I just want to add a filter, and I want to say, I want to look at just an AWS region. So I just want to see everything that I have in US East 1B. So now I've actually filtered to a specific availability zone, and we'll see that 500 servers turned into 264. So we basically cut it in half. And this is just an arbitrary demo that I'm showing you right now, where I've decided that I want to look at just these segments here. But this could be anything. This could be, I want to look at just the filter of a specific application or of my instance size if I'm doing A/B testing of different instance sizes. One thing that I haven't really mentioned that's a really powerful feature is that we don't generally run servers because we think it's fun to run servers. Nobody thinks it's cool to spend IT spend just for the sake of plugging in a machine. You run servers, and all servers' value generally comes from the fact that you have important applications or processes that are run on those servers. So just seeing, the CPU is at whatever percent doesn't mean quite as much if I can't say what applications is that actually affecting. So down here I can actually see of these 264 hosts, here are the applications, or a segment of the applications that are the least performant running on them. And I can actually see that this ecom service is actually running at a much higher response time. So if I see a spike in CPU and a spike in response time, I immediately am doing a triage where I can say, oh, like crap, that spike in CPU is actually affecting my business. I'm actually potentially losing customers. I can even validate that further by saying, I want to look at these applications broken down by throughput. So similarly, if I saw, oh, yep, my memory is spiking up, and then now all of a sudden my application throughput is dropping, that means that memory leak is losing me customers. So when you're initially going to triage issues, if you're coming from the dev or the ops side, like one of the primary things that you want to understand early on is, what does this actually mean for my business? What's the priority here? And you can do that. Again, we haven't even left the home page of this product. Show you just a couple other cool things that I really like about this. We've already filtered down to the US 1B, but one thing that we can also do is we can group by. So let's say that I want to see the instance type. Like I mentioned, there's kind of a scenario where you want to do A/B testing, like where you have an application out there that maybe you're running it on a C4 2x large, and that's expensive, and you're saying, I want to see, can I get away with running this on an M1 medium? Well, we can do this group by, and then we could add a filter that says, for this application in this region, group by the EC2 instance type. And now we're looking at all these same metrics, CPU, memory, load, except now you can see they're actually broken down by this group by statement. And I'm looking at, it's like, how are my M1 medium CPU performing next to my C4 8x larges? If the C4 8x large is sitting at about 70%, an M1 medium's not probably going to cut it. But if I saw an 8x large that was sitting at around 1% CPU consistently, I can probably downgrade that host and save myself some money. So like I mentioned, this is just kind of an arbitrary example. I just chose these filters because like I think that there's a familiar narrative behind them. But you can add your own custom filters. There's a lot, like I mentioned, that come out of the box. You can see all these kind of EC2 ones. You can filter down to the direct host name, operating system. So kind of sky's the limit with how you actually want to dissect this data. So that's one really powerful thing that I like showing off with. It's just kind of the dynamic nature of what it is that we're showing you. But one thing, okay, that's all pretty familiar, I'm sure. Like, it's like I'm sure a lot of people right now watching this are like, cool. Like now I can do a little triaging and debugging. But I don't think there was anything too revolutionary with what we just showed you. That's probably a lot of what you expected. So I want to start showing you kind of some things that are really impressive to me in particular. So right now, we can actually see on this graph, or there's an overlay on all these graphs, it looks like there's kind of a little yellow segment here, followed by a long red segment, and then it goes away. So what this is actually an alert that was triggered. So we can actually see if we hover over it that it's like there was an event over this threshold. So knowing that there was an alert is one thing, but knowing why that alert occurred is something that traditionally a lot of monitoring tools haven't done a very good job of telling you. It basically says something has went wrong, but not why has it gone wrong. So what New Relic Infrastructure wanted to aim to do was actually to give you context around these specific issues. So I'm just going to jump in and take a filter set, and we'll just filter it down to, we'll say, this is my Elasticsearch on my M3 larges in a specific region. And we can actually see here, around that alert spike, it's a little bit more pronounced. So I did a little segmentation here, and I can see, yep, it looks like these servers were what actually triggered this alert. We can see a pretty sharp rise in CPU. There's like where it kind of holds steady. It drops back down to a reasonable threshold, and then we kind of know what was going on. But when we actually jump, I'm just going to click from the Home Compute tab over to the Events tab. I actually get a full narrative as to what happened on that host around that time frame. So it's not just the CPU spiked, but it's what actually impacted that CPU spike. So we can see here, it looks like a user connected, L. Cerny, and logged into this specific machine. We can click into any one of these, we can get a little bit more detail. It looks like they installed a package called the account service. Any package, kernel mod will show up here. So we can, again, click in. We can see what version, specifics around what release and when did it actually occur. But then we can see if they modified the package, and then only a couple seconds later, we got into this warning threshold where the CPU is spiking. So now we can actually see, it's like, okay, user logged in, install the package, alert started triggering. That's a problem. Luckily, the user looks like they stayed logged in, and they caught it, about 10 minutes later, and they removed that account service package. And then the warning and the critical threshold went away. And then thankfully they logged off, so they're not going to wreak any more manual havoc on the system. But this is a really powerful feature that I really love personally in my day-to-day use of New Relic, in that I can actually see like what config changes happened on this host, like who actually modified what. It's like trying to get to the root cause of these things that may not be code-related problems that otherwise would be really hard to kind of figure out. So like I mentioned, it's like you're going to get packages, you're going to get session logins, you're going to get kernel information, service start stops. There's going to be a lot of different information that you can actually see directly from this UI. This is just a specific kind of narrative that I'm using for demo purposes. But this is all out of the box. So you basically install the New Relic daemon process on your host, and you're going to get like this tracing of all of these events automatically without any configuration or tweaks. So I just think that's a really cool thing to show off, especially when you're in an AWS world where you're really democratizing access. It's like as you move more towards that DevOps culture, like generally more people get more or different keys to the car, to use kind of an analogy there. And what that allows is, people to make mistakes. And I saw some study recently, where it was 60% of outages are actually attributed to somebody just misconfiguring something, somebody going in doing something manually, or a chef puppet job not actually taking it the right way. And this is really going to help you with auditing those types of scenarios. So one other really cool thing that I like showing off here, especially if you're in an AWS world, is what processes are actually running on these EC2 hosts. So here I can actually see across all of my hosts where these processes are actually running. Again, these same filters and group by statements apply just as they would in any other context, but I can actually say, I want to look at a specific host and I want to see just the processes that are running on that host without having to log into anything. One of the really big value props of that is, again, with an AWS-centric world, what you're going to see a lot of is people, they'll start up a, C4X large for some experiment that they're doing, and then they just forget about it. It's like they didn't tag it, there's no context. But that generally causes a pretty big headache for your IT department or your ops department or whoever's responsible for managing that. Because now all of a sudden, it's like you have these rogue instances floating around costing your business money. And there's no real easy way to audit them unless you're going to set up the SSH key, log into the box, run top yourself and try to figure that out. But here you can see this is just a really easy process. If I wanted to, I could just come in and say I want to look at just this UZ1 Docker. I want to filter to just that specific host. And now I can see we have an account service running on it. We can see how much memory it's taking up. We can see it's like we have Docker running, so that account service is likely inside of Docker. We can do a pretty comprehensive audit just out of the box, just by looking at this process information. So additionally, these filters, we can actually filter down to more specific information. If you are using Docker for whatever part of your architecture, you can actually filter down to container images, container IDs. You can kind of really drill into that Docker-specific information. If you have some abstractions like Kubernetes or Mesos, which make the actual process information maybe a little bit less valuable. So that's just another thing that I'm pretty juiced about. That it's like you can actually live audit any processes running on these hosts. Similarly, it's like this is more targeted towards AWS, so I'm not going to go into all of the surface area of infrastructure, but you can do network audits. So what NICs do I actually have? Like what kind of traffic are they getting? Storage devices. Am I running out of disk space? How many attached storages do I have? You can set up alerts on all of those things. So there's a lot of information just kind of looking at the top ribbon here that you get. But I want to jump back, and I want to say, we've talked a little bit about how does New Relic help you, just kind of getting high-level visibility into how your system's actually doing. But you're here for monitoring, and I think that a lot of that is just kind of investigating, or there's probably some other term, but it's not really monitoring unless you're actually doing alerting. So it's like, it's great to know, like, it's like a customer reached out to you on Twitter and said something was broken, and you can actually use this tool to get down to it. But I want to just show you how easy the alerting story to set up with. So instead of a customer reaching out on Twitter, like, you can reach out on Twitter ahead of time, like, hey, we're having an issue, we're already dealing with it. So I'm actually just picking this random CPU chart. All of the charts in infrastructure have the same functionality. And I can just come in here and say, I want to create an alert condition based on this chart. And what it's going to do is basically just jump me over to this alerts tab. I just give the alert condition a name. I can add whatever filters I want, same as I could for all the other information on the main pages. And then I can immediately say, I want, if the CPU goes above 90% for, or at least once in a 5-minute period, that I want an alert. And that's literally all that I have to do. Just give this a little name, demo condition, and then I just hit create, and that's it. It's literally that simple if I want to get alerted on this. By default, what it's going to do is it's actually going to send an email to the account. But additionally, what you can actually go through is you can set it up for notification channels, is what we call it. So if you wanted it to be, I want you to, it's like report this into my Slack chat room or into my Jira, or I want you to do a webhook into some other automated system that I have. You can hook it up to any of those things relatively simply out of the box. So the alerting process of setting up alerts and actually figuring out what you want to alert on is pretty dead simple with this product as well. So that's just a little bit about the extensibility there. One other really cool thing that we offer is, so what you're looking at right now is what New Relic thinks is a useful view of metrics for your business about your application infrastructure. But realistically, you probably know better than we do what your infrastructure actually looks like and how you need to monitor things. So what we've actually done is all of the data that you're seeing on these charts has been inserted into our New Relic Insights product, or the NRDB. And I can actually say, I want to view this CPU chart in Insights. And what that will do is basically jump you over to the Insights product. And what we get is basically a query, a SQLite query, we call it NRQL, where you can actually go in and modify this however you want and say, I want to look at like the average CPU time series, last 5 minutes. Or sorry, 5 minutes ago. And rerun this. Oh, sorry. Let me actually just modify this in a slightly different way. Let's remove the time series. And now, instead of getting the time series, what I've actually done is just aggregated this up into high-level aggregates for the last 20 or 60 minutes. So now I can actually look at the average numbers. I can modify this further where I could actually, NRQL's pretty extensive. I could say I want you to compare this with 1 week ago, so you can see what are the trends over time, like CPU utilization if you're doing any dynamic compute or something like Elastic Beanstalk where you want to be more prepared for those things. So there's a lot of opportunity for you to basically just come in here and say, not only can you create these charts, but you can say demo chart, add to a dashboard, we'll create a new dashboard. But you can actually take these charts, give it a name, add as many of these as you want, say you're done editing, and then just open up your Apple TV or some monitor that you have around the system, and you can actually just put these up on a wall. So you're kind of driving that passive awareness about how is your application infrastructure and your underlying server infrastructure doing at any point. Some really cool anecdotal stories, like when I was a development manager here at New Relic, we had a dashboard similar to this one where we just had a bunch of charts. And what we actually ended up finding out was we had a bug that we didn't have any alerting set up on, but we had somebody notice because they were so used to looking at these charts, crap, that number of 6.15 average CPU I/O weight, that's not normal to me. So they actually looked into it and they found out that there was actually a bug that was preventing part of our customer base from not accessing a part of our application. So just driving that passive awareness is a really cool thing that New Relic offers. So a lot of what I've shown you so far is very focused on the servers. So like I mentioned, it's like there's kind of the DevOpsy perspective of now I'm looking at these aggregate servers. We've talked a little bit about the application. We'll get into that a little bit more in a second here. But one thing that I want to kind of call out explicitly is we understand that your application complexity and like your DevOps story is a lot more than just servers. Generally you have caches, you have load balancers, you have databases. There's a lot of other technology that's really important to you that needs to be a part of the story for you to be able to do effective monitoring. So that's where the New Relic integration story comes into play. So what I'm actually showing you is just a segment of some of the AWS integrations that we have available that we've had since GA. In order to set this up, I mentioned that in order to get the server perspective, you basically just run a sudo apt-get, simple little command on the host directly. This is actually set up 100% SaaS to SaaS between us and AWS. So what you'll do is basically just create an ARN, give it some permission so we can access a couple different APIs on that side, read-only access, provide us that account, and we'll basically use that to pull in AWS data and give you some kind of higher-level presentations about how is your S3 storage actually doing, how is your EC2 as a whole doing. But one thing that we're really proud about is, if you're not familiar already, you probably will be relatively soon. AWS Lambda, and what Lambda is basically taking kind of what Docker did to the extreme and saying, I don't care about where this thing is run. Like, don't tell me like what the CPU is, like all those things. Like, what I want to do is say, here's some business logic. What Lambda basically takes is a function, so a little snippet of code, and I just want you to run this on regular intervals or when certain events occur in my infrastructure. So we can actually click into this Lambda one. This is just one example of many. But what I can actually see is I have 3 different Lambda functions set up on this account, and I can see how long on average are they actually taking to run. So it's like one big thing with Lambda is nothing can run for more than a minute. Generally, you want these things to be relatively quick and concise. So I can actually see like how is response time or how is execution time actually trending with these? Am I having problems? Is there something I need to address? I can see how often are they being invoked. So a lot of these aren't on a timer. They're actually it's like when something gets added to a DynamoDB table, then I want you to actually run this function. So you can actually audit that and say like how are my functions keeping up with that. Obviously errors is a pretty clear one. Luckily we don't have any going on right now, but we'd actually be able to see like it's like are we getting a certain function that's getting a lot of errors since the last change. There's also some really cool stuff here that, like, we talked a little bit about the concept of events and inventory, and those are actually carried into all of these other technologies. So I'm going to pull one up that maybe has a little bit better example to show you. So we'll look at EBS here, so the Elastic Block Storage. And what we're actually looking at down at the bottom here when we say events and inventory are basically what events have occurred for these EBS systems. So I can actually see here is when this volume was created. So if I actually want to go back and look historically at when a specific volume was created, I can actually get that historical context. I can click into it and be brought over to the inventory tab where it's actually going to show me a full audit of all of my EBS systems. That's the other really cool thing is that with the inventory perspective, we can actually see like what availability zones are running, what EBSs or Lambdas or SQSs or any other systems, and basically what's their high-level inventory data? How are they doing? Like are they passing status checks? Like you can do all the high-level audit without having to go to the AWS console, without having to audit a bunch of different logins, because generally you have to go cross-region and log into different places to get this kind of comprehensive view. So we pull all of that data in, like I said, automatically. You just create that ARN, pass it to us, and we'll pull all of this stuff in for you relatively easily. So that's kind of the high-level New Relic infrastructure, and we'll do kind of a quick summary in a second here. But I do want to encourage you, again, if you do have any questions, if there's anything that you want to delve into more, please don't hesitate to add that to the chat room now. So we'll jump back here and just kind of do a quick little recap. So this is kind of the core infrastructure. It's like, well, it is relevant to AWS. I think this is relevant to basically everybody. It's like New Relic Infrastructure helps you correlate between not just the different metric types, which we showed. It's like you can actually see the application metrics relative to the server metrics. You can actually see how they're impacting one another, slice and dice the data however you want. But also you can do that correlation in regards to events. So who logged into a server and changed something, and how did that affect my application response time? It's like there's kind of some other things that we didn't really have the time to delve too deep into, but I do want to emphasize that it's like while those metrics I showed you from the infrastructure perspective are pretty cool, it's also really cool to see it from the application side as well. So New Relic does a lot more than just this infrastructure monitoring. Like there's a lot of content out there, like where you can actually see our APM product, which focuses on the application tier, our browser product, which is on the front end, so the code that actually runs in the browser, written in JavaScript generally. There's mobile support. There's deeper visibility into the kind of plugins portion. So there's a lot of surface area that I haven't shown you that New Relic's going to help you with for that full stack visibility and true full stack visibility. Dynamic dashboarding and alerting, like I mentioned, like we don't want to just give you this kind of out-of-the-box view that you can't change to kind of adapt to your needs. So being able to create whatever dashboards are relevant to you to be able to say, like, I want to take this chart and contort it in this way, and I want to set up an alert based on that. Doing the alerting based off of any of those things, dynamically baselining those things is something that we've also released relatively recently, specifically for application data. So finding those abnormalities without having to do a lot of investigation, that's a really powerful thing. And then the inventory-wide visibility. This is something I get super juiced about. I kind of showed it, I think at a high level. Actually, I don't know if I delved too deep into the inventory. So I'm gonna take a really quick segue because I think this is one of the coolest things that we have. So I was starting with, I pretend that a new zero-day vulnerability actually came out. Generally, the process of how you go about debugging that zero-day vulnerability or auditing if you're susceptible to it is pretty cumbersome. It's usually a pretty painful process of like, you have to SSH into a lot of different machines. You have to kind of manually figure all of that stuff out. But what inventory basically does is it keeps a high-level audit of the exact snapshotted state of all of your system, your infrastructure, so you can actually run live queries against it. So again, pretend there's a vulnerability that comes out with OpenSSL. That's not uncommon. This is a pretty important library. A lot of people rely on this for their encryption and web security. So what I've basically done is I've basically said, for these 516 hosts, I want to see everywhere that OpenSSL is running. So what I basically got is a list of a bunch of different packages that have OpenSSL in it. And I'm just looking at the standard RPM for OpenSSL, and I can actually see for every single one of these hosts, what version and release of OpenSSL is it actually running. So we can see that there's 1.0, 1.02, there's some later versions. But then there's a 0.9, 0.8. So that's probably a little bit older. We can actually see it's probably about 20 releases behind. That looks like a problem. I can actually click into what are those 13 hosts. And now if I'm worried about some vulnerability in some package, I just run this at a high level, figure out what those vulnerabilities are, what the impacted hosts are. And then now all I do is I log into these 13 machines or update my Chef Puppet script, and I basically say, hey, let me check this again in 10 minutes and make sure that none of these hosts are falling into this category anymore. So that's something that is super powerful, and especially for saving time and keeping your company and your customers safe, in that this traditionally really painful process of figuring out where your vulnerabilities are is now just a real-time query against like, hey, what am I running where? So yeah, that was the inventory-wide visibility. You can do a lot more robust searches than just the OpenSSL package. You can basically do the high-level audits, especially over AWS metrics and whatnot. But I just think that's a really cool thing to kind of be able to search by metadata and see like, hey, what do I actually have running where? Just kind of high-level, things that traditionally are questions that we get asked a lot in regards to New Relic Infrastructure. So this is not an on-premises tool. This is not a cloud tool. This is completely ambivalent to where it's running. So you basically install this host, or you install this daemon on a host, and it doesn't matter where you run it. You can be running it on your personal laptop. You can be running it at your mom's house in the basement. Like, This thing is going to give you the same metrics, visibility into processes, inventory, events, high-level KPIs, no matter where your servers and your application infrastructure is actually running. We're not exclusively Docker. We're not, exclusively on-premises old, kind of data centers either. We really are kind of across the board. Like, we'll tell you what's running where. But the beauty of that is that if you're migrating towards Docker, or you want to try Docker, you're not going to lose any visibility. Or if you're already kind of bought into Docker and it's like you're doing something maybe a little bit more vertically scaled, or you're trying to take advantage of some older infrastructure, you'll get that same visibility in either, and it's going to be a parallel experience for both of those types of application infrastructures. So that's just a really powerful thing of we really tried to be as encompassing as possible. We talked a little bit about the AWS integrations. You can see here the kind of laundry list of what we actually support right now. This list, being that we just GA'd, is going to grow relatively rapidly. So stay tuned for that. It's not just AWS support. There's going to be a lot more things that will be coming down the line. So again, stay tuned. Config management and tool integration. This is just to call out that because all that New Relic infrastructure is at its core is a new daemon process that you install on the host, it's dead simple for you to integrate this with your existing Chef, Puppet, Ansible, or whatever else you have for config and deployment management. So actually trying this out is as simple as just SSHing into a host, doing a sudo apt-get command on a Debian-based machine, and that's it. And we'll actually provide you the commands, that you just copy-paste out. So it's a very simple process to get this thing installed and to work it into more advanced config management workflows. Just kind of quick recap of the AWS specific portions, because this is an AWS pivot on it. The slice and dice host by any AWS tag. Those AWS tags are going to come out of the box with that AWS integration, or some will be grabbed from the host. So you can also add your own custom ones, like I mentioned. So being able to dissect your infrastructure by whatever pivots you want is a relatively straightforward process. The dashboards, alerts, auto-scale along with your instances. So if you are taking advantage of something like Elastic Beanstalk or some other horizontal scale infrastructure, the dashboards and the charts and the alerts are all basically just going to play nice with that. You don't have to worry about there being servers that are disappearing and causing gray instances like you might have seen with some other tools in the past. So it's very easy for you to, it's not even easy. It's something that you don't even have to think about as you're scaling your infrastructure, because we know that's kind of a common paradigm that people are doing. EC2 automatic cleanup shows only active hosts. Like I mentioned, if a EC2 host stops responding, we're not going to hold it around like we may have in the past with the servers product. We're actually just going to make that thing disappear, so you'll have a historical perspective of it, but it won't be skewing averages for the current perspective. Optimizing the right size AWS instances for usage. I talked about one way that you could actually do that by looking at comparative metrics of maybe CPU or memory for pivoted by your instance type. So that allows you to basically just do that investigation and say, hey, what's can I get away with in trimming these instances down? Do I have spikes where I actually even need these bigger instances that I'm paying a lot more money for? And then the integrated monitoring of key AWS services. Like I said, you can do that 100% from our UI without logging into a single host, and you can get all of the visibility into this laundry list of different technologies that you're seeing in the bottom right here. So, just kind of drilling in, showing you examples. We went through this, but you can see the slicing and dicing out of the box, the integrations. This is just a small segment of them. There's many more. Again, Lambda is the one I'm most excited about because there's not a lot of great Lambda monitoring solutions out there right now. The automatic dashboards and integrated alerting, the Lambda monitoring. And just as a really kind of quick thing, for anybody who is familiar with the New Relic Servers product, a lot of people wonder about what's the difference between the two. This is kind of a high-level thing. It's like you can kind of read through this, but the main thing that I would say is the granularity, the inventory, the events, and the AWS specific integrations are like monumental leaps forward. You're going to get a lot more recent data, you're going to get a lot more insight, you're going to get a lot more context and metadata than you traditionally would with our service product, which functioned almost like just kind of a top that ran in the New Relic system. Really quickly, I always like calling out, it's like you're not going to be the first person to use this. It's like we have a lot of customers that were really engaged in our beta. I think it was the biggest beta that we actually had for our company. We can see 500 plus companies participate in the beta, over 10,000 hosts we've actually run on. We have a couple big names here of people who are saying, kind of how it impacted their business. I, as a technical person, actually have used this product as part of my day-to-day work, and I find it invaluable. The insight that it gives me is super, super powerful. But like I mentioned, this is something that I really encourage you to try out yourself, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in a second here. But this is something that we didn't talk a lot about, but I think it's a really important thing. New Relic Infrastructure is a piece of a much bigger puzzle that we call the digital intelligence platform. So, we spend a lot of time on the infrastructure-specific scenarios around servers and caches and queues and load balancers. But again, a lot of the data that you care about is actually how does that server tie into the application, and how does the browser trip from the first front-end web portal all the way to the back-end ORM style application that has the database on it, all the way back to the customer actually work out. So we have a lot more tools that are going to give you a lot more visibility into that. So please bear in mind that it's like if you're just looking at any one of these pieces, you're not looking at the whole story, and there's definitely opportunities for your customers to suffer or your business to suffer because of that. So like I mentioned at the very beginning, my real motive, no matter what I say, is I want you to just try this. It's a very simple thing to try. Just get a micro EC2 instance, install the agent on it, and just start clicking around, see what kind of visibility you get there. And I highly encourage you to do this on actual systems as well. See what your application actually looks like in production. Start shining a flashlight on some of those maybe darker areas in your infrastructure. If you go to newrelic.com/infrastructure, there's a 30-day free trial of all of the free setup. It's literally, I think, like a one-page form to fill out. It takes maybe 5 minutes to fill out the form, and maybe another 5-10 minutes to get the agent installed on your first host. So it's a very simple process. It's like if you think there's value in any of this stuff, I again highly encourage you to give it a try yourself. There are different tiers. Like I mentioned, you'll get the 30 days free. The only real difference between the two tiers right now is the months of retention. So you'll get 13 months of retention for the Pro, and then the SaaS integration. So that SaaS to SaaS integration that we talked about in regards to AWS is exclusive to the Pro account. But you'll be able to try that out 100% free without any paying right now, just by doing the initial setup on the newrelic.com/infrastructure page. So with that, we'll do a couple of common questions just to get these out of the way. What are the AWS services that do we actually monitor? I've shown you this a couple different times now, but I'm going to leave this up here so you can actually read through and see if your favorite's on there. What do I get with the Lambda monitoring? We actually delved into that a little bit. A couple of the big things that we like calling out are, it's cross-region, it's more filterable and dynamic, there's the event correlation, and then there's a 13-month data retention. So that's something that you're going to get over just using the CloudWatch metrics that you maybe are already familiar with. So there's a lot more value in maybe bringing this into kind of a comprehensive view of all of your infrastructure and getting a little bit more longevity out of the data and a little more correlation out of it as well. Is it a new agent to the servers? Yes, it is. It'll be a separate install. It's just as easy, no dependencies. It's just a sudo apt-get, so it's a very dead simple install process, but it is a separate agent. Can you sort by any AWS EC2 attribute? Yes, we will pull them all in, and like I said, you can actually do custom attributes as well, so sky's the limit there. And is New Relic Infrastructure cloud performance monitoring only? We talked about this a little bit, but I just really want to emphasize, we talked a lot about AWS, but if you have on-premises systems and you're running a hybrid architecture, you can work on either one. Doesn't matter at all. So with that, I will jump into the Q&A. Sorry. So how easy is it to automate the agent installation? It's dead simple. Maybe that question was asked a little bit before we talked about it, but I do want to call out that actually setting up and automating the agent installation is like any other process. I didn't call out, it actually works on Windows as well as an MSI, so you can actually script the MSI install exactly like a Windows community member would expect. Or there's a yum and an apt-get repo for Debian and Red Hat-based distros. So very, very simple. It's basically just a series of commands which you jump into any bash script. I cannot see integrations in my version of infrastructure. It could be that you're past the 30-day trial, or that there could be a bug. So I would actually say I will follow up with you after this call, and we will figure out why you're not seeing the integrations tab. How do we point New Relic Infrastructure to our AWS account? So setting it up for the New Relic AWS account, I talked about it kind of at a high level, but I will try to jump over here and just give you a little bit more insight into that. So the process, like I mentioned, it's predominantly done in the AWS console, but you basically can just come in here and say, I want to add an additional account. And if you click on the Add Additional Account, it's basically going to give you this exact little walkthrough. So the high level is you create a role and you assign permissions to that role that basically allow us access. So you'd be delegating that access specifically to the New Relic account. So that means that nobody else will be able to take advantage of that role if it ever did leak. We're very security conscious. It's going to be read-only permissions to begin with. But you'll basically give us the pasted output and just basically say, I'm going to create that role in our system, and that's it. So once you create the role, you paste the ARN, little role ARN detail that you see here on our side. That's all that you have to do. And you will immediately get all of the integrations and the pulling of the AWS EC2 metadata for the filtering and faceting that we talked about in the beginning. When will NR infrastructure be fully integrated with the new alerts product? So the story right now is there's a lot of a lot of the common scenarios are built into the infrastructure product directly. We wanted to focus on making sure that you didn't have to navigate to a lot of different places for that story, but it's not 100% built into the core New Relic alerts UI. So that's kind of what that question is addressing. Unfortunately, I'm not the PM, so I couldn't give a definitive timeline, but I do feel comfortable saying that this is something that we're well aware of, and it was just a priority decision from the beginning. So I would imagine not long. Since this product is aware of the AWS services we run, does it provide an estimation of the total cost of running the servers? No, unfortunately it doesn't. That was actually a very long discussion that I was a part of. We talked about that kind of ad nauseum. While we all agree that cost is a new performance metric, it's like you can kind of buy infinite CPU and memory, but you're going to run out of money pretty quickly there. We understand that cost is an important metric. The problem is just the metrics change too rapidly, and not knowing how people are actually going to be using dynamic infrastructure, like our estimations, those equations get pretty complex pretty quick, and we didn't want to be misleading. It's like we definitely kind of acknowledge the value in bringing the cost metric out, but we also acknowledge that there's just a lot of effort that goes into doing that in a worthwhile, trustworthy way, and we just weren't there yet. Is the service product going to be retired in favor of infrastructure? So currently, again, not being the PM and kind of being tangential, I don't have any official visibility or stance on that. Right now, they are 100% parallel. There's no immediate term plan that I'm aware of to favor one for the other. But again, I am not the right person to ask. Will a containerized installation method for the agent be supported? That is a very interesting, nuanced question. So if you're aware, the kind of containerization story traditionally has been difficult for infrastructure products because what it does is it abstracts away the application from the underlying host, and that's one of the big value props that New Relic offers, is basically how do I get from the application to the host? And if you have containers in the way of that, the story is a little bit harder. So a containerized installation would actually require, and has traditionally required for our servers product, you to basically run a very special container that basically peels away all of the onion layers of abstraction, so it basically has access to a lot of the host information to begin with. So I assume that the story will probably be somewhat comparable because that host level information is a lot more valuable than anything from the container itself. So yes, it will likely support a containerized installation method, but that containerized installation method will just be a convenience as opposed to an abstraction. Kubernetes managed infrastructure on AWS. So I'm not sure if you're talking about like actual like Kubernetes, like you running manually, or like ECS, or like some other orchestration mechanisms in general. But generally, like I mentioned, like what you care about is the underlying compute health. So like, do I have adequate CPU? Do I have memory? Like kind of like those high level things, and then what's running on those servers. And Kubernetes is just going to manifest as Docker containers, which, as I showed you on the processes tab, you can actually see that visibility. And like I just answered in the last question about the containerization, will give you good visibility into like what actual applications are running from the host to the application as well. That's kind of an important thing there. So right now, like there's nothing specific Kubernetes that you'll see in the product, and I'm not sure if there ever would be. But you'll definitely be able to see all of the things that you'd care about in a Kubernetes-centric infrastructure, where you can say like, okay, this container is running here, and it's impacting this application, and it has these stats. Pricing for infra, I'm pretty sure that that's actually available just on infrastructure.com or newrelic.com/infrastructure or newrelic.com/pricing. So I know that we're really transparent about that. I'm not sure of the exact link off the top of my head, but I know it is available somewhere from our homepage. Cannot see application and infrastructure monitoring. Does it require anything to do with the application monitoring? There are some nuanced challenges for seeing applications that are running inside of Docker containers. So if you are running inside of Docker containers, it may actually be creating some issues with the correlation between APM and the underlying server. It's a relatively easy problem to work around. It's well documented in our forum, which I'd highly encourage anybody to check out. It's discuss.newrelic.com, and that would be a really good place for you to go to get the answers into that. And I can actually just see Shay has pasted in the window 2 links that I just referenced. So what is the infrastructure pricing model, and the discuss.newrelic link, which will bring you into how do you actually get around the applications not showing. By the way, that applications not showing should not affect anybody not running in a Dockerized infrastructure. So if that is the case, I'd recommend following up. The forum is a good place to kind of paste these things. We actively watch that, so that'll be a good place to see if there's anything abnormal. So how do you monitor CPU memory between the host and multiple Docker containers? So we have the high-level host visibility because we run the daemon actually on the host level. But then the multiple Docker containers, basically they get broken down at the process level. So you're probably aware that behind the Docker abstraction, it's basically just another process that's running in a certain sandboxed environment. So we basically give you the same CPU and memory information that we would from any other process. So you can actually break down by individual container. You can aggregate by container instance, by container name or ID or image. So kind of arbitrarily bulk these things up however you want, but that's how we do it. We basically treat them exactly like we would a process. Licensing, that will be addressed again in the chat room with the first link that Shay politely put in there for infrastructure pricing. Are there any plans to provide mechanisms to automate actions, restart? So right now we are very focused on being read-only and just helping you kind of understand what issues and giving you the visibility there before we start touching anything. That's kind of been the New Relic philosophy for a long time. It's like we want to make sure that we're being a very good comprehensive solution before we start adding to the problem, as most write tools tend to do. So not being the PM, I couldn't speak to kind of specific roadmap, but I do know that there is some really cool stuff that we do other places in our product where we don't necessarily take action per se to actually restart a service or anything like that, but we'll actually give you pretty detailed breakdowns of if there's a slow database query, we'll actually give you hey, it looks like you have an N+1 query here, or hey, it looks like this is actually having performance issues. So there's definitely an opportunity for us to embed that same type of kind of smarts into the product. And I think that's it. So yeah, so there's a couple follow-up questions, so I will follow up with those folks offline, but definitely take the time, please, to just give this a chance, try it out, see if the value's there. Please also take the time to provide some survey feedback for me personally and the company, just so we kind of know if this is valuable for you and this format worked. And as always, feel free to reach out to me through the forums or anywhere else, and the company as a whole. We really appreciate and need your feedback to continually create great products. So thank you all for your time.
Thanks, Adam. Just a quick reminder, I'll be sending out a link to the recording shortly after the presentation. Have a great day, everyone.